Hi, everyone. It's 4 o'clock in New York as hundreds of children languish in what's described in the Washington Post as a total labyrinth after being forcibly separated from their parents at the border. Donald Trump dismisses their suffering on Twitter, decrying what he calls phony stories of sadness and grief. In an event designed to refocus the immigration debate on the dangers posed by immigrants, Donald Trump today held an event with families who have lost loved ones to crimes committed by people in this country illegally.
You know, you hear the other side, you never hear this side. You don't know what's going on. These are the American citizens permanently separated from their loved ones. The word permanently being the word that you have to think about, permanently. They're not separated for a day or 2 days. They are permanently separated because they were killed by criminal illegal aliens. These are the families the media ignores.
Trump's attempt to change the subject and move the media away from disturbing images of children detained at the border comes as his aides try to walk back their support of the family separation policy. Here was Jeff Sessions yesterday in an interview.
It hasn't been good. And the American people don't like the idea that we're separating families. We never really intended to do that. What we intended to do was to make sure that adults who bring children into the country are charged with the crime they've committed, instead of giving that special group of adults immunity from prosecution, which is what, in effect, we were doing.
That's exactly what they intended, and Jeff Sessions' comments are a complete reversal of his stated policy goals when he proudly and brazenly announced the policy that began this nightmare.
If you are smuggling a child, then we will prosecute you, and that child may be separated from you as required by law. If you don't want your child to be separated, then don't bring him across the border illegally. It's not our fault.
Our policies that can result in short-term separation of families is not unusual or unjustified, and it's really a very short period of time. And I would cite you to the Apostle Paul and his clear and wise command in Romans 13 to obey the laws of the government, because God has ordained the government for his purposes.
I'm no expert, but I think the Bible comes down pretty hard on lying. Joining us to discuss today's developments, some of our favorite reporters and friends. Joining us from the Washington Post, White House Bureau Chief Phil Rucker. Former U.S. Attorney Joyce Vance is back with us. And with us at the table, the Rev. Al Sharpton, president of the National Action Network and host of Politics Nation here on MSNBC. John Heilemann's back, NBC News and MSNBC national affairs analyst. And Jason Johnson, politics editor for The Root. Joyce, let me start with you, because I follow you on Twitter, and I saw you just responding in real time to what you saw today, the sort of contrast between the president's event with these families who suffered tragic losses of their own, but an effort to try to change the immigration debate that has engulfed this White House and this administration over the last 10 days.
You know, the losses that these families have suffered are tragic, and they're individual tragedies. No one would ever make light of them. We went through, in my family, the murder of my father-in-law, and it's a pain that you feel with you every day. But the problem that we see when the president brings these families out to justify his immigration policies is that equally innocent young children are being separated from their parents as though they are somehow to blame for the criminal acts of others. And we know, because virtually every study tells us that populations of people who've entered this country illegally are far less likely to commit crimes and violent crimes than are the entire population of American citizens. So this is really sort of a solution, or maybe it's an answer in search of a question that doesn't exist.
John Heilemann, let me show you one of the president's favorite morning hosts this morning, trying to label these kids as somehow other than us. This is Brian Kilmeade. Let's watch.
These aren't our kids. Show him compassion. But it's not like he's doing this to the people of Idaho or Texas. These are people from another country, and now people are saying that they're more important than people in our country who are paying taxes, who have needs as well.
Yeah. I was just watching some of the old World War II footage of, Americans liberating camps. And I mean, the idea that America doesn't look out for other people's kids is just nauseating.
Of course, yes, that's certainly true. It's also, of course, the case that there is literally no one in the United States of America who is saying that these children are more important than American children. Not one person. That's Brian Kilmeade just talking crap on television in support of the president. No one's saying that. All anybody is saying is that the children of America are of paramount importance. That has nothing to do with whether or not it's effective, moral, acceptable, in any way tenable to be taking guilt-free children, innocent children, stripping them away from their parents and throwing them into detention centers or jails. They're just totally unrelated arguments. And he, like the president, and as Fox News often does, is trying to change the subject and still somehow turn this immigration issue, which is what they want to now talk about, the evils of immigration and the other. They want to try and still try to turn this into a winning issue for the president. It is at the end of this week in which, for a brief moment, we thought there might be a moment where the president was slightly chastised by the outrage felt not just among Democrats and moderates, but many, many, many millions of Republicans. It turns out the president is as shameless and repulsive on this question as he was on Monday.
And Rev, it does seem to indicate, though, that there's some acknowledgement that there's a hole that needs to be dug out of. I mean, to see all of them go to this effort to change the subject, to see Fox News, which is basically an arm of this Trump White House comms shop, trying to say, well, it's not like these are our kids. This is not our problem. It seems that there is some recognition that they have done themselves some harm in some corners.
I think that clearly they're trying to dig themselves out of a hole. But it takes the height of insensitivity to use families who've lost loved ones to be your shovel to dig yourself out of a hole that you put yourself in. First of all of us, I agree with what was said, all of us hold in high esteem these families who have a lost loved one. But what does that have to do with separation of other families? He's mixing an issue that has nothing to do with the other. And for him to shamelessly do that because of what he did, I think is to add and manipulate their pain. Secondly, when you have someone saying that they're not our children, but he very carefully says they're not from Idaho or Texas, he's really sending this whole racial signal that I've been saying from the beginning, which is why I went yesterday to McAllen, Texas, with an ecumenical group, because we're not saying that about Canadian children, or we're not saying about people that come here illegally from other countries. We're saying that about children from South America, Central America, Mexico, and the Caribbean, because he's not saying that about everybody. He's saying that about distinct people who are stopped at that border. Are we standing at the Canadian border saying, if we find any of y'all coming in another way, we're separating you from your children? No, because they wouldn't tolerate that. And most of Donald Trump's base wouldn't tolerate seeing white children treated like that.
But don't give any ideas, though. Because we might start incarcerating Canadian children. Next thing you know, that could be, if the president sees some political advantage to that, that could be next.
And Chris Hayes has made this point, and we've mentioned on this program, that there is a racial through line through the lowest moments of Donald Trump's presidency: Charlottesville, the Muslim ban, the inadequate, inept, and ongoing tragedy in Puerto Rico.
Yeah, well, look, I've said this all along. This is white nationalism. It's not about being a bigot. It's not about I don't like you here. This president and his administration have explicitly said we want to change the demographic future of this country. We want to keep brown people out. We want to have the brown people who are here afraid or terrorized or wanting to go home. We want to limit where people can come from. 87% of our refugee resettlements from Europe have already been done this year.
Right.
We're 6 months in, and 87% of Europeans have already been resettled here. But somehow it's a problem when you have asylum seekers at the border who've traveled 10,000 miles through dangers, some of which were caused by our administration. If you look at the coup in Honduras, Some of what these people are fleeing has to do with our policies south of the border, but they don't want to take any responsibility for that.
Phil Rucker, your paper has done an incredible job covering the story, and I want to read you some of your reporting today on just the confusion that's been created by the president's policy pronouncement, by the executive order itself. You guys write, reversal on migrant families deepens confusion over Trump's immigration order. In scenes reminiscent of the botched Muslim ban in the early days of the Trump presidency, federal agencies Thursday were largely left to interpret the sudden changes ordered by the White House the day before and figure out how to implement them. A family separation system that has been planned and tested over several months vanished at the president's pen with no stated plan to reverse its effects.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Nicolle. There's really a sense of chaos within the federal government as the different agencies, and there are several agencies involved here, try to figure out how to implement this order and how to change this policy that went into place a couple of months ago. And it all seems to be driven by the president's desire to see this as a public relations issue. He's been bothered by the news media coverage of the family separation policy, and that's why he rushed that executive order 2 days ago and signed it to try to say that he would be keeping these families together. It's much more complicated when it comes to implementing the policy. And one thing, Nicolle, you mentioned the angel moms, the parents who'd lost children to the crimes of illegal immigrants that the president had at the White House. He's been using them since the very beginning of his presidential campaign. I was at that rally in Phoenix when he was in trouble for those immigration remarks, and Macy's was dropping his line of clothing, and it was a huge issue. And he used these parents, brought them into the forefront to try to say, look, I was right at the beginning. Some of these illegal immigrants are murderers, are criminals, and so forth. And it's been a bit of a crutch for him all the way through.
I want to read you something, Heilemann, that the Baltimore Sun reported today that sort of picks up on what Phil and his colleagues have reported. Immigration agents have sent dozens of children to Maryland. I believe the Post has reported that there are 13 states right now that we know of where separated children are being held. Others are being held in dormitories in Anne Arundel and Baltimore counties, according to people involved in the process. Many of the children have come with little information. One is 18 months old. Several are too young to speak to their new caregivers or help social workers track down relatives who could take them in. Lawyers are trying to figure out how to put together asylum claims for 6-year-olds who don't know why they fled their countries.
Yes. Well, so I think we talked about the ways in which this is similar to the Muslim ban, and there are a lot of ways in which it's similar. The authorship, Stephen Miller being behind it, the racism of it, the invidiousness of it, right? They're very similar in this one key respect, though. The administration is just as incompetent as ever, right? So if you take insidiousness and add it to incompetence, you are going to get...
And racist.
You are going to... Yeah, well, racism is part of the insidiousness. I've already factored that part in. If you got insidious plus incompetent, you're going to get chaos. And that's what we have right now is chaos. And it's chaos, again, around children, right, who are blameless and are being put in this position where they're being treated really as with no due process, and they're being treated effectively as less than human. And again, I always have one more thing to say. I'll add one last thing.
Please.
These are, Joe Scarborough said it this morning, these are still being treated like black sites, these detention centers.
Right.
We have they are public facilities paid for by American tax dollars that American journalists are occasionally allowed to enter, but no cameras have yet been allowed inside of, right? We are still locked out, the American media, in covering these things in the open way in which we could cover any other public facility in American society. It is outrageous that we cannot hold this system to account now that we know about it, now that we know the addresses of some of these places, that they're still saying, no, you cannot come in and shoot this stuff with your cameras. It's ridiculous.
Let me ask Joyce Vance a legal question. I mean, when you have a suspect, even if they're suspected of terrorist activity, if they're in the Southern District of New York, they're allowed to meet with their lawyers. They're allowed some sort of legal rights. These are children too young to explain why they might have been seeking asylum. These are children. We're not sure of their language skills. I mean, who is advocating? How do you operationalize emotional support, medical care, and legal advocacy for an 18-month-old?
You know, this is the difficulty that agencies on the border are struggling with, and many people who are well-intentioned, like social caseworkers, will be overburdened. The immigration system on the border was already stretched tighter than a wire, Now it will be broken beyond repair, and there won't be adequate services. The whole idea that we walked into this and that Jeff Sessions, when he implemented zero tolerance, had no plan for reunifying their children with their parents, these kids with their parents. The whole idea that there was no plan, and now in the middle of what's a resource crisis for the government as well as an incredible human crisis for the kids and their parents, means that this will be dysfunctional for the foreseeable future.
That was the plan. This is what Steve Bannon said. Chaos. They want this to be chaotic because that frightens supposedly people from coming to this country. Also, the goal of so much of this administration is to make.
You think these images are what they wanted people to see? So that you think that was?
I think it works both ways. We have to remember that there is a section of this country, 40-something% of people, some of which won't admit to it in polls, who like this, who say, I don't want these kids here, who want them terrified. They want this to go down. You look at what Melania did, right? I'm playing this both ways. It's linguistic and communications gymnastics. On the one hand, I'm going to go down, I'm going to play to the libs, right? I'm going to go here and talk to these kids, but I'm going to put this on my jacket.
But she didn't even talk to kids. We were there.
There's not 47% of the country who want to see little children. I didn't see little children. Even 40 who want to see little children in jail. They're not.
Yes, there are.
But I think that we should not get beyond the point that she just made, and that is that if they had had a plan, as they said, to later reunite them, then why can't they just escalate the plan now? Because there never was a plan to reunite them. They didn't care about it because all you'd have to do is accelerate it now. And when we were there yesterday in Texas and the First Lady came, they denied clergy visits. I'm there with Monsignor Sullivan and Rabbi Pessner. Mobsters, gangsters, mafia dons get clergy visits. These are 18-month-old babies that you can't even pray with when you have this Bible-thumping attorney general. Where is his plan? Whatever you were going to do down the road by and by when the morning came, Attorney General, why can't you do it now? Because there never was a plan. They didn't see these people of having value. We were going to break them up, and whatever happened to them in life, that's what happened. And that's vicious.
Phil Rucker, let me get you back in on this. Do you have the sense, I mean, there was some reporting yesterday that the Pentagon was getting prepared. They were ordered to prepare to house 20,000 immigrants on Army bases. Do you get a sense that this EO halting the practice means that there will be no more children separated? Or do you get the sense that they still feel like this could go either way and they're preparing for those numbers to swell again?
I think, Nicolle, it could go either way. The bottom line is we don't really know. There hasn't been a clear directive from the administration of exactly how this is going to be implemented and executed. There's also, and we haven't gotten to this, but the legislative piece of this is a huge question mark right now. The House Republicans don't have the votes to pass what they thought earlier in the week was going to be sort of a legislative fix to this problem, and that's been punted in part because of something the president said on Twitter this morning about delaying until the midterm elections. And so the bottom line is you have all these agencies preparing different contingencies, but there's not a clear directive from the White House about exactly what to do and exactly how this is all going to shake out and how you reunite these families. They're not being reunited right now.
All right, when we come back, a new front in the case for collusion against Donald Trump, this time with the owner of the National Enquirer.